So we previously acknowledged that this is called currency. Not money, but currency. So now currency, money, all of this are creatures of law. Without law standing behind it, it has no effect and no impact. We need law for everybody to rally around and agree to use this as a medium of exchange. So, speaking of the law, I have a little legal question. I was going to tell a little story, and I want everybody to think of the correct answer, and I'll get to the question here in a minute, but I'll tell the story first. So the story, let's go back 50 or 60 or more years to a small town life on a farm. We have a father and his son working in the field. And the father says to the son, I'd like you to run down to the general store and pick up some milk, bread, and eggs. Here is a note telling the shopkeeper that I will settle the debt the next time I see him. Please give him this note and have him give you the bread, milk, and eggs. So the young boy runs down to the general store. He hands the shopkeeper the note. Say, please give my son milk, bread, and eggs, and I will settle the debt the next time I see you. So the young boy packages up the eggs, the milk, and the bread, and begins his way back to the farm. So now, halfway back to the farm, my question is, when he's halfway back to the farm, holding the milk, bread, and eggs, on his way to deliver them to his father, who is the true owner of the milk, bread, and eggs at that moment? I'll give you a minute to think about it. Okay, I lied. A minute's too long for a video, so we'll get into it here. So the majority of people say the boy is the owner. And when I ask why, occasionally people will say, well, because he's in possession of it, and possession's 9/10 or 9 parts of the law. And that's true. Possession being 9 parts of the law is an old Roman legal maxim that goes back to the statement, no one is required to prove that they own something that they are in possession of. Let me repeat that. It's an old legal maxim that says no one is required to prove that they own something that they are in possession of it. In other words, the possession of it should be enough to denote ownership. But in fact, it isn't the boy. The boy isn't the owner in this case. So most people will then say, well, it must be the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper still owns it. And I say, okay, well, what's the reason? They say, well, because he hasn't been paid yet. Okay, well, that's an interesting distinction. The fact of the matter is that the father is the owner of the milk, bread, and eggs. Now, to be correct, owner is a somewhat of a questionable term in this case, because really what it comes down to is property right. There are 3 people now that have a property right. For example, if someone came along and threatened the boy to take that, he could exercise his property right, possession being 9/10 of the law, at that moment, and he could deem that to be his and fight and defend for it and be able to stand on his law in order to do so. All right? Now, if the store owner doesn't get the debt settled by the father, then he can take that man to court to try to recoup on the note that he gave him. But in fact, because he was given a note and accepted it, the highest property right resides in the father, because he has now divested himself of some value of his labor by promising that labor for full payment and restitution of the debt once he sees the store owner. So we actually have 3 different property rights here, but one of them is actually a higher property right than the other. So this is interesting. You say, well, how does this all relate to money and currency and all these things? Well, the fact of the matter is that note isn't a whole lot different than this note. Now, the fact that government has printed this note for us to use and pass around it's kind of irrelevant in reality. It just helps when you're dealing with someone you don't know. But if we had a trust relationship, I could just as easily promise you, something worth this $20 note as payment or restitution or debt settlement, right? Correct? I could do that. We could agree on that. But if we're strangers, it's much easier that we agree on this because this is recognized by everybody. And that's really all that makes this have any value, is the fact that we all trust it. And when that trust breaks down, that can change. And we've seen that throughout history. If you look at times when currency has lost trust, you can see a major breakdown in society. Take the Weimar hyperinflation or the Zimbabwe hyperinflation. All those hyperinflations was really a loss of trust in the currency. So how is this relevant to gold and silver, for example? Well, what we want to establish is why these are different than gold and silver. Gold and silver are the real thing. They're solid. They can't be multiplied. We can't take them and add zeros to them. They weigh what they weigh, and weight is a very specific way of measuring something that's a fixed value, whereas this 20 is not a fixed value. Right now, I could buy a certain amount of fuel with this for the car I'm driving. But a year from now, I couldn't possibly buy the same amount of fuel if the past has been any indication of price increase of gasoline. I can't see this buying the same amount of fuel next year. So what's changed? The fuel hasn't changed. A liter is still a liter. But if it takes more of these to purchase it, then something has changed about this. And that again is back to the illusion. So the lesson here, folks, is that it's all just notes and promises. Nobody's really necessarily delivered on those promises yet, and that's where the problem begins. We'll get into more of this later.